It's very difficult to understand why so many of our friends and neighbors continue to deny climate change and mistrust sound environmental programs and policies. Tonight I'm going to be discussing these very important topics with author, lecturer, and filmmaker Shawn Otto. Shawn, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Shawn Otto is truly a 21st century Renaissance man. Shawn and his wife, State Auditor Rebecca Otto, run a small farm in Washington County. Shawn is an author, filmmaker, speaker, novelist, and award-winning science advocate who carries his campaign for science across the globe. He's the co-founder and producer of the U.S. presidential science debates. These debates are beginning to light a torch for scientifically underinformed politicians. His book, Fool Me Twice, Fighting the Assault on Science in America, won the 2012 Minnesota Book Award. Shawn, I heard Don Shelby tell an audience that he had to spend a considerable time reading, digesting, and thinking through the book because it contained so many thought-provoking ideas. Give us a flavor of what that process was.
In late 2007, when a friend, the science writer and screenwriter Matthew Chapman, who happened to be Charles Darwin's great-great-grandson, and I started talking about how we noticed that none of the candidates for president were talking about any of the big science issues that were facing the country. Primarily climate change, but also all of the other big issues like science education, energy, ocean health, economic competitiveness, investments, etc. So we decided to form a small online organization called Science Debate 2008 at the time, which was a call to get the candidates to answer some of these questions. We put out feelers to scientists, friends of ours, and had a form where they could sign up. And before we knew it, within a few weeks, we had 38,000 scientists and engineers sign on, wow. Including dozens of Nobel laureates. I mean, these people were the top scientists in the United States, as well as several members of Congress. Our own Betty McCollum and Tim Walz were early signers and supporters of Science Debate 2008, and several leaders of corporations, Texas Instrument, McDonnell Douglas, and others. We realized suddenly that we had hit a nerve, but the candidates didn't see it that way. Despite this large level of support that we received, eventually including hundreds of leading U.S. universities and almost every science and technology organization in the United States, the candidates for president did not want to talk about any of these issues, and in fact they ignored us. Well, what had happened in American political dialogue where suddenly it was acceptable for candidates for president to debate religion? The candidates, for instance, went to the Compassion Forum, which was broadcast on CNN from Messiah College, after they turned us down for a science debate. They went and spoke with Pastor Rick Warren in California about faith and values yet again. But science, the thing that had powered the United States to our current position, that had grown our economy to the most powerful economy in the world, that was taboo. Something was upside down.
Was it taboo, or do you think that the candidates or their staff that determined that this was a subject that simply didn't resonate with the public at large?
Yeah, we got that. We got that from both sides, from campaign staffers. They thought that it was a niche topic. Nobody was interested. Yeah. So we decided, well, let's use a little science to test that idea. And we did a poll and found that actually 85% of Americans thought that the candidates should be talking about these things and should attend a debate that was dedicated to talking about these forward-looking topics.
So what was the upshot?
They continued to ignore us. They really didn't engage until we finally really put them over a barrel in a number of ways. There were a number of issues that finally tripped that, and Barack Obama's campaign finally contacted me right around the time of the Democratic National Convention and said, okay.
This is in Denver.
Yes.
2008.
2008. Okay, Senator Obama is willing to participate. So then we went back to McCain, and within 2 weeks he had agreed to answer as well. They both decided that they were going to answer the questions online because they were nervous about doing it on TV.
Sure. What was the caliber of their answers?
You know, the caliber was pretty good. What it did was it underscored that we're not interested in quizzing them on the third or fourth digit of pi.
Exactly.
These are serious policy issues that really need to be talked about by any forward-looking president. And in fact, President Obama, as a result of that initiative, really changed a lot of his thinking around how science fit into his strategic objectives. He appointed, after he was elected, several of our early supporters to key policy positions in his administration. For instance, Energy Secretary Steve Chu, who is a physicist, early supporter of ours. Jane Lubchenco became the director of NOAA. Marcia McNutt, who grew up in Minnesota and had led the Monterey Bay Research Aquarium. John Holdren was appointed presidential science advisor. So a number of those people helped to shape the president's policy perspective after that.
What transpired? What triggered you to write the book?
Well, after the election, I was still stunned by the level of denial on the part of top politicians and political aides about the public's level of interest in these issues and about science. We did a lot of querying about why the media wasn't covering this initiative more, even though we had so much support from hundreds of university presidents even. And the candidates were dodging these issues, and yet the media wasn't covering it.
Really?
We started talking to news directors, news editors of the Associated Press and others, and we found that science there too is regarded as a niche topic. It is not afforded room on the political pages, and yet political reporters are not allowed to cover science. They too had the perception that the public wasn't interested, when I think that really what it was these are English majors, and they weren't interested.
Isn't there a move afoot, and I think it's reflected in your book. In fact, I know it's reflected in your book. It's not just benign neglect. Aren't certain elements of the political establishment out there taking on science as something that people should be able to rely upon?
Oh, absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, generally it's vested interests whose interests are contradicted.
Economic interests?
A lot of times it's economic interests, sometimes it's ideological interests. Anytime that topics that are science related, for instance, evolution, the reality of it, versus creationism, whether or not creationism ought to be taught in science classes, as many fundamentalists believe. Anytime that there's a conflict between what we're learning from knowledge and our long-held, cherished ideological beliefs, that threatens a certain vested interest, and those people will campaign against science. Now that also happens economically, and we're seeing that a good deal, particularly on the largest economic issue that science has posed, which is climate change.
I don't think anybody, with some exceptions, would debate that we're pushing the climate system very, very hard at the present moment. Do you think the United States, acting alone, can realistically address climate change? Because it occurs to me that countries like India and China are in the forefront of countries that will have to amend their practices to reduce emissions.
Well, the best model for thinking about this is our global diplomatic efforts, particularly through the State Department, but also through our general diplomatic policies. This is a world security issue. It's a global security issue. In fact, the Department of Defense has done a lot of modeling.
I thought the oil industry was a global security interest. Did I miss something here along the way?
Climate change is a global security interest.
I understand. I'm just kidding.
The oil industry is a private interest, and we are making concerted efforts, particularly the Obama administration, to start to move away from oil reliance to such a high degree. The most important thing we can do is energy efficiency. That will save the largest amount. That's something my wife, Rebecca Otto, has worked on with her special report, which she won a National Excellence in Accountability Award for teaching local governments how to make smart investments to reduce their energy use.
Our listeners will recall that we interviewed your wife, and we talked about that back during the course of that interview.
Oh, great.
So what is the position of the United States then? Should it be leading by example so that when it goes to India or China, that it can say, we're just not talking the talk, we're walking the walk? I mean, what?
Absolutely. The thing is, a lot of people say the United States, we shouldn't be talking about American exceptionalism. I disagree. America is an exceptional country. The form of democracy that we created here was the first modern democracy. We are the oldest democracy. We are the country with the greatest level of moral authority that other countries look to set the example and to lead. So this is definitely an issue that if we want the rest of the world to begin to follow, they will follow.
Is the United States at all successful in attempting to negotiate with other countries some form of addressing climate change and reduction in the emissions?
No, unfortunately. We've had a terrible failure at that throughout the last several climate summits.
We have the deniers, you know, the Rush Limbaugh, the Glenn Becks, the Michelle Bachmann, and you name any other stripe of political know-nothings that would deny climate change. So if we just carve that group out, what's left? Do you think it's possible that given us over a certain period of time, the world can cope with increased emissions?
Well, that's the key issue, is over a certain period of time. The problem that we're seeing right now is the rate of change, and it's happening so fast that life is not able to adapt to it very well. We are trying to adapt using technology, but one of the biggest issues that's facing us is ocean level rise. The ocean is absorbing a tremendous amount of the thermal energy and the carbon dioxide that we're producing. If you think about, for instance, the city of Duluth. Duluth really doesn't get as cold as some inland areas in the winter, at least not as quickly, and in the spring it doesn't get as warm as quickly. That's because of that great massive body of water there, that specific gravity of that water that's holding all that energy. It takes a long time to heat up and it takes a long time to cool down. And right now those oceans are heating up and heating up and heating up and heating up. And what happens as water heats up is it expands. And as it expands, the ocean level comes up.
Now, so you're telling me that we can have an increase in the water level in major bodies of water simply by the fact that the temperature rises utterly apart from such things as the melting of the Arctic or the Antarctic ice surfaces?
Well, the melting of the Arctic won't affect it at all, because that ice is already floating and displacing water. The melting of the Greenland ice shelf or the melting of the Antarctic, since those are on land, that will have a very large impact if all that ice went.
In the media within the last 60 days, there's been projections that Miami could be substantially underwater I believe, by the end of the century.
Well, not just Miami. Look at what happened to New York City. I was speaking there and left a few hours before Hurricane Sandy came in and made landfall. And I was talking to Paul Douglas that night, and I was getting emails from him, and it was incredible what climate modelers and what he was able to do to predict exactly how much rainwater and how much storm surge was going to inundate New York City. I mean, he had it down to the number of inches that were going to flood LaGuardia, and he was exactly right. It was incredible. We do base policy on models all the time, and our models predict exactly what's happening.
Simply coping, is that possible to do on any kind of effective basis?
It's tough, because the largest issue that we're being presented with, in addition to desertification and the increased temperatures, is that sea level rise, and 80% of our population lives along the oceans. So we're talking about massive displacement of
worldwide.
People. Yes, yeah.
What can you tell our viewers as to promote our elected politicians to address scientific issues on a rational basis? You sort of take the premise, we got to get some more scientists in Congress. Well, that probably isn't going to happen.
It is slowly beginning to happen. A number of scientists, through the process of science debate or through reading the book, have contacted me and said, you know, you're right. We have been trained for the last 2 generations to not participate in the political process. And there's actually evidence that shows that the scientists that engage the public tend to also be the most productive scientists.
Shawn, exceedingly thought-provoking. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers through DFL Senate District 48, Eden Prairie, and Minnetonka. Sharon Boreen, Chair.